In 127 AD, a Roman architect named Gaius Maxentius built something so revolutionary, so dangerous, that the Senate ordered it buried and erased from every record. For 1,000 years, this invention remained hidden beneath the streets of Rome, guarded by a secret society sworn to protect it from the world. What was it? A machine that could have ended all warfare, eliminated famine, and unified the known world under a single banner. But it had one fatal flaw. In the wrong hands, it could also destroy civilization itself. This is the story of Rome's greatest secret, the men who died protecting it, and the catastrophic moment when it was finally discovered. 3 people have already died trying to tell this story. Before we reveal what was hidden, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. New York, London, Lagos. Let's see how global this audience really is, because what happened in Rome didn't stay in Rome. What you're about to hear sounds impossible. A machine built with ancient technology that modern engineers claim shouldn't exist, but the evidence is undeniable. The archaeological records, the encrypted manuscripts, the bodies found in sealed chambers clutching tools that make no sense for their era. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented history that was deliberately suppressed. And by the end of this documentary, you'll understand exactly why the Roman Senate was so terrified of this invention that they'd rather destroy their own empire than let it see daylight. Let's begin in the year 127 AD in the workshop of a man who was about to change everything. Gaius Maxentius wasn't born into greatness. He was the son of a freedman, a former slave who had earned his liberty through decades of skilled labor building aqueducts across the empire. Gaius inherited his father's genius for engineering but possessed something his father never had: formal education. A wealthy patron, impressed by the young man's natural talent, had sponsored his studies in Alexandria, where Gaius absorbed everything the ancient world knew about mathematics, hydraulics, mechanics, and natural philosophy. By age 35, Gaius had already designed 3 major aqueducts and 2 public baths that were considered architectural marvels. But he was obsessed with a problem that consumed him day and night: efficiency. The Roman Empire was built on human and animal labor. Everything from construction to agriculture to mining required endless hours of backbreaking work by slaves, soldiers, and citizens. Gaius believed this was not just cruel but wasteful. He became convinced that nature held forces that could be harnessed to do work without human suffering. His colleagues thought he was mad. The prevailing philosophy held that only living things could generate motion and work. Machines were tools that humans operated, nothing more. But Gaius had studied the work of Hero of Alexandria, the brilliant inventor who had created steam-powered devices, automatic doors, and mechanical theaters. Hero's inventions were considered novelties, toys for entertaining wealthy patrons. Gaius saw something different: proof that inanimate forces could be controlled and directed. For 5 years, Gaius worked in secret in a workshop beneath his villa in Rome. He told no one what he was building, not even his wife, not his closest friends. He purchased materials through intermediaries, hired craftsmen for individual components without revealing how they would fit together, and worked alone during the final assembly. Neighbors reported seeing strange lights in his windows late at night, and hearing rhythmic sounds like nothing they'd encountered before. The breakthrough came on a winter night in 126 AD. Gaius had been experimenting with water pressure systems, attempting to create a mechanism where water flowing downward could power wheels that lifted other water upward, creating a self-sustaining cycle. The principle was simple: use gravity in one place to overcome gravity in another, with the mechanical advantage multiplying force. But achieving it required precision engineering that pushed the limits of Roman metalworking. When his prototype finally worked, Gaius stood in shocked silence for nearly an hour. Water poured from a reservoir, turned a series of gears and wheels, and lifted water back into the reservoir while simultaneously powering a grinding wheel. The system wasn't perfectly efficient. It needed external water added periodically. But it proved the concept. A machine could perform continuous work with minimal human intervention. The implications made Gaius's hands shake as he sketched improvements. Over the next year, Gaius refined his design obsessively. He created a machine that could grind grain, pump water, saw wood, and power hammers, all simultaneously, all from a single water source. The device was massive, requiring a room 20 feet in each dimension, but it did the work of 50 men. More importantly, Gaius had documented the principles so thoroughly that the machine could be replicated, scaled up or down, and adapted for countless purposes. But Gaius made a critical mistake. In his excitement, he confided in someone he trusted: his patron, Senator Lucius Valerius, the man who had funded his education decades earlier. Gaius believed the senator would help him present the invention to Emperor Hadrian, securing funding to build machines across the empire. Instead, Senator Valerius recognized something Gaius, in his idealism, had missed. This invention was a threat to the entire social order of Rome. Senator Lucius Valerius called an emergency secret session of a group that few Romans knew existed, the Conservators. This was an informal council of the Senate's most powerful members, men who saw themselves as guardians of Roman tradition against destabilizing change. They met in a private chamber beneath the Senate building, a room that officially didn't exist in any architectural plans. Valerius presented Gaius's invention not as a marvel but as a catastrophe waiting to happen. His argument was devastatingly logical. Rome's economy was built on slavery. Millions of people owned slaves who performed essential labor. If machines could replace that labor, what happened to the slave system? What happened to the millions of Romans whose wealth was measured in human property? What happened to the social hierarchy when the fundamental basis of the economy collapsed? But the economic argument was only the beginning. Valerius understood power dynamics better than engineering. He explained that Rome's stability depended on keeping large populations busy with labor. Idle people became restless people. Restless people became rebellious people. If machines eliminated the need for human labor, what would millions of displaced workers and freed slaves do? How would they eat? How would they find purpose? The machine promised abundance, but Valerius argued it would deliver chaos. The military implications were even more troubling. Imagine, Valerius said, if these machines were used to mass-produce weapons, armor, and siege engines. Imagine if an enemy of Rome acquired this technology first. The balance of power that had kept the empire secure for centuries could shift overnight. Worse, what if rebellious provinces used such machines to become self-sufficient, no longer needing Rome's economic network? The empire could fragment. The conservators debated through the night. Some argued that Rome should monopolize the technology, keep it secret, and deploy it only for imperial purposes. Others wanted it destroyed completely. A few brave souls suggested that the machine could usher in a golden age if implemented carefully, but they were outvoted by men whose power depended on the status quo. The final vote was nearly unanimous. The machine must be buried, the plans destroyed, and the inventor silenced. But they faced a dilemma. Gaius Maxentius was not a nobody. He was a respected engineer with powerful friends and public projects bearing his name. Simply killing him would raise questions. They needed a more subtle approach. Senator Valerius volunteered to handle Gaius personally. He visited the architect's workshop with a proposal that seemed generous. The Senate would fund the construction of one full-scale version of the machine to be installed in a secret imperial facility. Gaius would be handsomely rewarded, given an estate in the countryside, and honored as a genius. But the invention itself would remain classified for reasons of state security. Gaius, exhausted from months of anxiety about his creation's implications, agreed. He was relieved, actually. The responsibility of changing the world had become crushing. If the empire wanted to control the rollout of his invention, that seemed wise. He would build the machine, document everything clearly, and trust that future generations would use it wisely. He had no idea he was signing his own death warrant. The conservators had no intention of ever using Gaius's machine. They wanted it built for one reason only, so they could study it thoroughly enough to ensure it could never be rebuilt, then bury it so deep that it would never resurface. And Gaius, the only person who fully understood the principles, would need to disappear as well. The Senate provided Gaius with an underground facility on the outskirts of Rome, officially designated as a secure imperial warehouse. In reality, it was a chamber specifically designed to become a tomb. The room was excavated deep beneath ground level, accessible only through a single entrance that could be easily sealed. Gaius, focused entirely on his work, noticed none of the ominous details. For 6 months, Gaius supervised the construction of his masterwork. He had a team of 30 skilled craftsmen, each sworn to secrecy with generous payments and subtle threats about imperial security. The device was even more impressive than his prototype. It stood 15 feet tall, a maze of bronze gears, iron axles, copper pipes, and ceramic valves. Water entered through an aqueduct tap, flowed through a series of channels and wheels, and powered 6 different workstations simultaneously. The machine's centerpiece was what Gaius called the perpetual wheel, a massive gear system that, once started, would continue running as long as water flowed. The mechanical advantage was so great that a single stream of water falling only 20 feet could could generate enough rotational force to power saws, grinders, pumps, and presses. Gaius had essentially created the first industrial machine, capable of doing work at a scale and consistency no human labor force could match. As the machine neared completion, Gaius documented everything in a detailed manual. He created technical drawings showing every component, written instructions explaining the operating principles, and mathematical formulas proving why it worked. He wrote in Latin and Greek, ensuring the knowledge could be preserved for future generations. This manual, written on treated parchment and bound in leather, was his true legacy, or so he believed. The day of the machine's first full operation was scheduled as a private demonstration for select senators. Gaius arrived early, excited to show his perfected invention. He noticed that the usual guards had been replaced by unfamiliar soldiers, but assumed this was standard security for a senatorial visit. He noticed that his craftsman team hadn't been invited to the demonstration, which seemed odd, but accepted the explanation that the event was classified. Senator Valerius arrived with 5 other senators, all members of the conservators. They watched in genuine awe as Gaius activated the machine. Water flowed, gears turned, and the device hummed to life with a sound like distant thunder. Grain poured into a hopper and emerged as flour. Wood fed into a saw emerged as perfectly cut planks. A hammer station pounded metal with rhythmic precision. It was magnificent, terrifying, and undeniable. After the demonstration, Senator Valerius congratulated Gaius warmly and suggested they celebrate with wine. Gaius accepted gratefully, exhausted and proud. He didn't notice the wine tasted slightly bitter. He didn't notice the senators watching him with expressions that mixed admiration and pity. He didn't realize that the drug in his wine was already shutting down his heart. Gaius Maxentius died believing he had secured Rome's future. In reality, he had just solved the conservators' biggest problem. His death would be reported as a tragic heart failure brought on by months of exhausting work. His body would receive an honorable funeral, and his machine would be sealed in its underground chamber, along with his manual and all the tools used in its construction, buried under tons of rubble and concrete. But the conservators made one critical error. They assumed that burying the machine and killing its inventor would end the story. They didn't account for one person who knew almost as much as Gaius himself, his apprentice. Titus Marcellus was only 19 years old when his master died, but he was brilliant, observant, and deeply suspicious. Titus had been Gaius's apprentice for 3 years, working closely on every project. While Gaius had been secretive about his final invention, Titus had helped acquire materials, had seen some of the components, and had heard enough to understand the basic principles. When Gaius died suddenly, Titus's suspicions exploded into certainty. His master had been healthy, energetic, excited about the future. Heart failure made no sense. Titus began investigating quietly, asking questions, following the craftsmen who had worked on the secret project. What he discovered terrified him. The craftsmen were disappearing. Over the course of 2 months following Gaius's death, all 30 men who had worked on the machine either died in apparent accidents, left Rome suddenly, or vanished without explanation. The pattern was too obvious to be coincidence. Someone was systematically eliminating everyone who knew about Gaius's invention. Titus realized he was next. As Gaius's known apprentice, he was an obvious loose end. But Titus had one advantage: nobody knew how much he actually understood. He had played the role of eager student but had never asked probing questions about the secret project. He could pretend ignorance, but he also knew he couldn't just let his master's greatest work disappear. Titus made a bold decision. He would find the machine, document it himself, and hide that knowledge for a future when it might be safely revealed. It was an audacious plan for a teenager, but Titus was driven by grief, anger, and a sense of duty to his murdered master. Finding the machine proved easier than expected. Titus had friends among the slaves who maintained Rome's aqueduct systems. Through careful questioning, he learned about an unusual water diversion that had been installed 6 months earlier, feeding an underground chamber on Rome's outskirts. The location matched what little he knew about where Gaius had been working. Breaking into the sealed chamber was harder. The entrance had been filled with rubble and sealed with concrete, but Titus was a trained engineer's apprentice and had access to tools. Over 3 nights, working alone, he excavated a narrow passage through the rubble. What he found on the other side took his breath away. The machine stood intact in the darkness, magnificent and silent. Gaius's body had been removed, but everything else remained. The device itself, the tools, and most precious of all, Gaius's manual, sitting on a workbench exactly where his master had left it. The conservators had sealed the chamber, planning to return later to destroy everything, but bureaucracy and political distractions had delayed them. Titus had a window of opportunity. For 2 weeks, Titus worked in absolute secrecy. He couldn't remove the machine, it was too large, and dismantling it would take too long. Instead, he focused on knowledge. He studied Gaius's manual until he could recite it from memory. He created his own simplified copy, condensing the essential principles into a smaller document he could hide. He made detailed sketches of key components, and he memorized the mathematical formulas that explained why the machine worked. Then Titus did something extraordinary. He couldn't save the machine, but he could save its legacy. He carefully removed several critical components, unique gears, specially designed valves, custom bearings, and hid them in different locations across Rome. He buried some in his family's garden. He hid others in the foundations of public buildings under construction. He gave one to a trusted metalworker with instructions to preserve it without knowing what it was. Finally, Titus resealed the chamber, making it look undisturbed. Within days, he left Rome, claiming he was seeking new opportunities in Alexandria. In reality, he was running for his life. But before he left, Titus made one final vow. He would create a secret society dedicated to preserving the knowledge of Gaius's invention until such time as humanity was ready for it. That society, which Titus called the Brotherhood of Perpetual Motion, would guard Rome's greatest secret for the next 1,000 years. Titus spent the next 40 years of his life building the Brotherhood from scratch. In Alexandria, far from Rome's immediate reach, he established himself as a respected engineer, taking on legitimate projects while secretly recruiting members to his cause. His criteria for membership were exacting: technical knowledge, moral integrity, and absolute discretion. The Brotherhood's purpose was singular: preserve the knowledge of Gaius's machine until a time when it could be revealed without destroying social stability. Titus understood the conservators' fears better than Gaius had. He recognized that the machine, released into the wrong era or wrong hands, could indeed cause catastrophic disruption. But he also believed that knowledge once discovered could never be truly destroyed, only delayed. Titus created a system of knowledge preservation that was brilliant in its paranoia. The complete understanding of Gaius's invention was divided into 7 parts, each documented separately and hidden in different locations. No single member of the Brotherhood knew all 7 parts. Masters of the Brotherhood knew 2 or 3 parts. Only the Grand Master, a position Titus held for decades, knew where all 7 documents were hidden. The documents themselves were works of art, written on treated parchment that would last centuries, sealed in copper tubes filled with inert gases, and hidden in locations designed to survive wars, fires, and floods. One was buried beneath a church in Constantinople. Another was sealed inside a false column in a library in Carthage. A third was hidden in a cave system in Crete. The locations were chosen for geographic diversity and relative stability. But physical documents were only part of the preservation strategy. Titus also created an oral tradition, a series of technical lessons disguised as philosophical teachings. Brotherhood members learned engineering principles that seemed abstract, but actually contained the core concepts behind Gaius's machine. A student might spend years learning the principle of falling water's hidden strength, without realizing they were learning the mathematics of hydraulic power multiplication. The Brotherhood grew slowly but steadily. By the time Titus died in 182 AD, there were 43 members scattered across the empire: engineers, architects, scholars, and craftsmen. All were bound by sacred oaths, all believed in the mission, and all understood that revealing the secret prematurely meant death. The conservators still existed, still watched for any signs of Gaius's invention resurfacing. For centuries, the Brotherhood operated in the shadows of history. They took on public engineering projects, gaining respectability and influence. They infiltrated libraries and universities, positioning members to protect knowledge and identify threats. They monitored politics, watching for signs that society might be ready for revolutionary technology, and they waited. The Brotherhood's greatest test came during Rome's collapse. As the Western Empire fragmented in the 5th century, the organization faced an existential crisis. Should they reveal the invention to try to save Roman civilization? The debate within the Brotherhood was fierce. Some argued that Rome's fall proved society wasn't ready for such power. Others believed the machine might have prevented the collapse if deployed earlier. In the end, the Brotherhood chose preservation over revelation. The Grand Master at the time, a Roman engineer named Quintus Fabius, made a persuasive argument. Rome is not civilization. Rome is one civilization. The knowledge we protect is for all humanity, not just our empire. We wait not for Rome to be ready, but for humanity to be ready. And so the Brotherhood continued through the Dark Ages, the Byzantine era, the Islamic Golden Age, and the medieval period. The organization evolved, incorporating members from different cultures and religions. A Muslim scholar in Baghdad might guard one document while a Christian monk in Ireland protected another. The secret transcended politics, religion, and nationality. By the year 1000 AD, the Brotherhood numbered over 200 members worldwide. They had survived the fall of Rome, the rise of Christianity, Islamic expansion, and countless wars. The 7 documents remained hidden and intact. The oral traditions continued being passed down, and Gaius's machine, sealed in its Roman chamber, waited in darkness for rediscovery. The rediscovery came not through careful planning but through random chance. In the winter of 1127 AD, exactly 1,000 years after Gaius had built his machine, a wealthy Roman merchant named Paolo Rixi was expanding his wine cellar, excavating deeper into the foundation of his property. His workers broke through into an unexpected void, an ancient chamber that shouldn't exist. Paolo, curious about his discovery, descended into the chamber himself with torches. What he found made no sense. A massive mechanical device covered in dust and cobwebs but remarkably preserved in the dry, sealed environment. Bronze and iron components showed minimal corrosion. The construction was clearly ancient, Roman in style, but the complexity was unlike anything Paolo had seen in ruins or museums. Most people would have reported the find to authorities or perhaps tried to sell the metal. Paolo did neither. He was an educated man, fascinated by ancient Rome, and he recognized that he had stumbled onto something extraordinary. He sealed the chamber, told his workers it was just an old foundation, and began researching quietly. Paolo spent months studying the machine, sketching it, trying to understand its purpose. He recognized gears, water channels, and what appeared to be workstations, but the overall design eluded him. Then, while consulting ancient texts in a monastery library, he encountered a cryptic reference in a 3rd century manuscript, the machine of Maxentius, which the Senate feared. The mention was brief, easily missed, but it gave Paolo a name to research. He found scattered references to a Gaius Maxentius imperial architect who had died in 127 AD. The dates matched his chamber's probable age, but he found no explanation of what Maxentius had built or why it was buried. Paolo's research attracted attention he didn't anticipate. The Brotherhood of Perpetual Motion, still active after a millennium, had members monitoring libraries and scholarly networks for exactly this kind of inquiry. When Paolo requested specific ancient engineering texts and began asking questions about water-powered machinery, alarms sounded within the organization. A Brotherhood member, a scholar named Brother Domenico, approached Paolo under the guise of sharing mutual interests in ancient technology. The conversation was carefully orchestrated to determine how much Paolo knew and whether he had actually found the machine. Within weeks, Brother Domenico was certain. After 1,000 years, Gaius's invention had been rediscovered. The Brotherhood faced an unprecedented decision. Their entire purpose was preservation until the time was right for revelation. Was 1127 AD that time? Medieval Europe was experiencing the early stirrings of technological advancement. Water mills were common. Mechanical clocks were being developed. Universities were forming. Perhaps society was finally ready. The Grand Master, an elderly German engineer named Heinrich, was brought to Rome in secret. He met with Paolo, saw the machine firsthand, and faced the choice that Titus had prepared the Brotherhood to make 1,000 years earlier. Heinrich spent 3 days in prayer and contemplation before reaching his decision. "The time is not right," Heinrich concluded. "The machine is wondrous, but its principles are too advanced. We lack the mathematical understanding to replicate it safely. We lack the social structures to deploy it fairly. We lack the wisdom to use it responsibly." Another century, perhaps two, but not now. Paolo was devastated. He had expected the Brotherhood to celebrate the discovery to help him reveal this marvel to the world. Instead, they were asking him to rebury it, to keep it secret, to wait for some undefined future. The argument became heated. But Heinrich had authority Paolo hadn't anticipated. The Brotherhood over a millennium had accumulated significant influence. They had members in the church and merchant guilds in noble families. Heinrich made it clear Paolo could cooperate and be welcomed into the Brotherhood, learning secrets far beyond the machine, or he could resist and face consequences ranging from destroyed reputation to mysterious death. Paolo, trapped and frightened, agreed to cooperate. He was inducted into the Brotherhood, learned their history, and understood their mission. He helped reseal the chamber, documenting its exact location in the Brotherhood's encrypted records, and he took the oath: preserve the knowledge until humanity is ready. But Paolo also did something the Brotherhood didn't anticipate. He wrote a hidden account of everything: his discovery, the machine's location, the Brotherhood's existence, and concealed it in a place he thought was secure. It was an insurance policy, or perhaps revenge. Paolo couldn't reveal the secret himself without breaking his oath, but he ensured that someone someday might uncover the truth without Brotherhood permission. That hidden account would remain undiscovered for another 9 centuries, but when it finally surfaced, it would trigger the very catastrophe the Brotherhood had spent a millennium trying to prevent. In 2019, a graduate student at the University of Rome named Alessandra Conti was researching medieval merchant families for her thesis. While examining documents in a private family archive, she found something unexpected: a sealed copper tube hidden inside a false bottom of a 12th century document chest. The chest had belonged to the Rixai family, descendants of Paolo. Inside the tube was Paolo's hidden account, written in medieval Latin with encoded sections. Alessandra, fluent in Latin and experienced with historical ciphers, spent weeks translating the document. What she read seemed like fantasy, a secret Roman invention, a 1,000-year-old conspiracy, a machine buried beneath modern Rome. It was obviously fiction, historical fantasy written by a bored medieval merchant. Except for one detail that bothered Alessandra: the specificity. Paolo's account included exact measurements, precise locations, architectural details that seemed too technical for fantasy. Out of academic curiosity, Alessandra checked whether any of Paolo's geographical descriptions matched actual Roman ruins. To her shock, they did. The location Paolo described was now beneath a 16th-century building in Rome's historic district. Alessandra faced an ethical dilemma. If Paolo's account was real, this was an extraordinary archaeological discovery. But it was on private property, might be protected heritage, and involved claims about secret societies that sounded like conspiracy theory. If she reported it officially and was wrong, her academic credibility would be destroyed. She chose a middle path: unofficial verification. Alessandra had a friend, Marco, who did ground-penetrating radar work for archaeological surveys. She convinced him to secretly scan the location Paolo had described, claiming it was for her thesis research. The radar revealed exactly what Paolo had documented: a sealed chamber approximately 20 feet below current ground level, with significant metallic content. Now Alessandra had a real problem. The chamber existed. Something metallic and large was inside it. She could no longer dismiss Paolo's account as fiction, but excavating privately would be illegal. Reporting it officially would raise questions about how she found it, and Paolo's warnings about the Brotherhood suddenly seemed less absurd. Alessandra made a choice that would change her life. She went public with everything. She wrote an article for a popular history website, posting Paolo's translated account, the radar data, and her analysis. She included the exact location and called for official archaeological investigation. The article went viral overnight. Within 48 hours, Alessandra received death threats, offers of money for exclusive rights, and a visit from people who identified themselves as Brotherhood representatives. The visitors were polite but firm: excavate the chamber and she would be responsible for consequences she couldn't imagine. Refuse to help with excavation and they would ensure her academic career ended. But it was too late for threats or bribes. Alessandra's article had sparked international attention. The Italian government, under public pressure, announced an official excavation. News networks covered the story as potential discovery of unknown Roman technology. Archaeological teams assembled, and despite the Brotherhood's desperate attempts to delay or prevent it, the excavation began. On October 15, 2019, excavators broke through into the ancient chamber. The machine stood exactly where it had been sealed nearly 2,000 years earlier. Cameras captured every detail as archaeologists, engineers, and historians examined the device. The images went global immediately. A Roman machine unlike anything in the historical record, with engineering sophistication that seemed impossible for the era. Initial assessments were stunning. Materials analysis confirmed the components dated to the early 2nd century AD. The bronze and iron showed manufacturing techniques consistent with Roman metalworking, but applied to create precision parts that wouldn't be common until the Industrial Revolution. The design incorporated principles of mechanical advantage, hydraulic power, and gear reduction that engineers recognized as fundamentally sound. Most shocking was when hydraulic engineers studied the machine's design and declared it theoretically functional. If water were introduced to the system, if the components were cleaned and lubricated, the machine should work. An ancient Roman device buried for 2 millennia that could potentially function as its creator intended. The implications were staggering. The archaeological world erupted in controversy. How could Romans have built something so advanced? Why was it buried rather than used? Why was there no historical record of it? The debates became heated, with scholars split between those who saw it as proof that ancient capabilities were underestimated and those who suspected elaborate hoax. But while academics argued, engineers had a simpler question: does it work? And despite every objection from historians, archaeologists, and the Brotherhood, permission was granted to attempt restoration and operation of Gaius's machine. The restoration took 8 months. An international team of engineers, classicists, and metallurgists worked to clean, repair, and prepare the machine for operation without damaging its archaeological value. Every component was documented, scanned, and analyzed. Modern understanding of ancient materials allowed them to replicate Roman bronze and iron properties for replacement parts. The Brotherhood watched in horror, no longer able to stop the process but still trying to warn of consequences. Current Brotherhood members, now operating openly, published articles and gave interviews explaining their organization's 1,000-year mission. They presented the 7 documents, now retrieved from their hiding places, showing that the Brotherhood's claims were historically verifiable. The documents created their own sensation. Historical verification confirmed they were ancient, dating from the 2nd through 5th centuries AD. The technical content matched the machine's design perfectly, and the Brotherhood's membership records, maintained in encrypted form for a millennium, included names of historical figures whose presence in such an organization had never been suspected. But the warnings the Brotherhood issued fell on deaf ears. Modern society, they claimed, was making the same mistakes as ancient Rome, deploying revolutionary technology without considering social consequences. The machine would work, yes, but it would also demonstrate principles that could destabilize current economic and political structures if widely implemented. The warnings sounded paranoid, alarmist, and were largely dismissed. On June 7, 2020, the restored machine was activated for the first time in 1,893 years. The event was broadcast globally. Engineers had connected water supply, installed modern monitoring equipment, and prepared 6 different workstations: grain grinding, water pumping, wood sawing, metal hammering, stone polishing, and textile winding. When water was introduced to the system, nothing happened for several seconds. The gathered crowd held its breath. Then, with a sound like distant thunder, the primary wheel began to turn. Gears engaged, shafts rotated, and one by one the workstations activated. Grain poured into a hopper and emerged as flour. A saw blade bit into wood. A hammer struck metal with rhythmic precision. The machine worked perfectly. 2,000 years after its creation, Gaius Maxentius's invention proved itself functional, elegant, and revolutionary. The crowd erupted in cheers. Engineers wept. Historians stared in disbelief. And around the world, millions watched as ancient technology performed industrial work with an efficiency that impressed modern observers. But the true significance became clear only when engineers began analyzing the machine's performance data. The energy efficiency was extraordinary. The mechanical advantage was greater than initially calculated. Most importantly, the principles demonstrated by the machine could be applied to modern systems in ways that could dramatically reduce energy consumption in industrial processes. Within weeks, engineering teams worldwide were studying the design, publishing papers, and proposing applications. The machine's gear ratios inspired new transmission designs. Its hydraulic principles suggested improvements to hydroelectric systems. Its material properties revealed lost metallurgical techniques worth recovering. And then, the economic disruptions began. A Chinese manufacturing company announced it had replicated the machine's core principles in a device that reduced energy consumption in textile production by 60%. A German engineering firm applied the hydraulic principles to create pumps that required half the power of conventional designs. A Brazilian company developed a grain processing system based on the machine's mechanical advantages that could operate in areas without electrical infrastructure. The applications multiplied faster than anyone anticipated, and with each new implementation, economic ripples spread through affected industries. Companies that had invested in conventional technology found themselves suddenly holding obsolete equipment. Workers trained in old methods faced displacement. Supply chains built around energy-intensive processes became uncompetitive. The Brotherhood had been right. The machine's principles, released into an unprepared global economy, were causing exactly the kind of disruption they had feared for a millennium. But unlike ancient Rome, modern society couldn't simply bury the knowledge. The internet had made the information impossible to contain. The economic incentives for implementation were too strong to resist, and the social structures needed to manage the transition didn't exist. The chaos the Brotherhood had spent 1,000 years trying to prevent had finally arrived. 2 years after the machine's activation, the global economy was still absorbing the shock waves. The disruptions weren't catastrophic. Modern society proved more resilient and adaptable than the Brotherhood feared, but they were significant, uneven, and ongoing. Some regions and industries flourished with the new technology, others collapsed, and the social costs were mounting. The most visible impact was employment. Industries that had employed millions in energy-intensive manufacturing saw massive job losses as companies adopted Maxentius principles. Unlike previous technological revolutions that happened gradually, this change hit suddenly, driven by the obvious efficiency advantages and competitive pressure. Governments scrambled to create retraining programs and social support systems, but the pace of change stripped their capacity to respond. The environmental impacts were mixed. On one hand, industrial processes based on Maxentius principles consumed dramatically less energy, reducing carbon emissions and pollution. On the other hand, the economic incentive to expand production, since it was now so much cheaper, led to increased overall industrial activity. Efficiency gains were partially offset by increased scale. The geopolitical consequences were perhaps most significant. Countries with access to the technical knowledge and manufacturing capacity to implement Maxentius-based systems gained significant advantages. Others fell behind, creating new forms of inequality between nations. The technology became a weapon in economic competition, with some countries restricting exports of advanced implementations while others offered them as development aid with political strings attached. Alessandra Conti, the graduate student whose discovery had triggered everything, found herself at the center of global debate. Some celebrated her as a hero of knowledge who had liberated ancient wisdom for modern benefit. Others blamed her for releasing disruptive technology without adequate consideration of consequences. Death threats from displaced workers arrived alongside prizes from scientific organizations. The Brotherhood fractured. Some members believed their mission was complete. The knowledge had been preserved and released when humanity demonstrated the capability to find it. Others argued that their warnings about premature release had been vindicated, and that they should work to limit the damage. A few advocated for destroying all records and retreating into secrecy again, though this position was obviously impractical given how widely the knowledge had spread. The machine itself became a museum piece and pilgrimage site. Restored and preserved in a climate-controlled facility in Rome, it operated daily for visitors, a working testament to ancient genius and modern controversy. Engineers studied it. Historians debated it. Children watched in wonder as 2,000-year-old technology performed industrial work before their eyes. But the most profound impact was philosophical and cultural. The machine proved that ancient peoples were far more capable than previously assumed. It demonstrated that technological knowledge could be deliberately suppressed for political reasons. It showed that revolutionary innovations could lie hidden for centuries, waiting for rediscovery. These realizations forced a fundamental reassessment of human history and potential. Educational systems worldwide began incorporating the Maxentius story into curriculum, not just as engineering history but as a case study in technology ethics, knowledge preservation, and social responsibility. The question, "What would you do if you invented something revolutionary?" became a standard thought experiment in philosophy and engineering classes. Gaius Maxentius, dead for nearly 2 millennia, became more famous in death than he ever was in life. His story was told in documentaries, books, and films. His name became synonymous with suppressed genius, and his machine stood as a permanent reminder of both human brilliance and human fear of change. The Brotherhood of Perpetual Motion, their secret revealed and their mission ambiguous, transformed into an open organization dedicated to technology ethics. They advocated for careful assessment of new technologies before widespread deployment, for social preparation before economic disruption, and for preserving knowledge while also protecting society from its premature use. Whether anyone listened remained an open question. 3 years after the discovery, Alessandra Conti stood before Gaius's machine during a private visit. She had completed her doctorate, written a best-selling book about the discovery, and become a leading voice in debates about responsible innovation. But she still wrestled with the question, had she done the right thing? "I gave the world a gift," she said in an interview years later. "But gifts can be dangerous. Gaius learned that, the Brotherhood learned that, and now the world is learning it again. Knowledge isn't just power, it's responsibility, and I'm not sure we're any better at handling that responsibility than Rome was 2,000 years ago." The machine continued to turn, gears meshing as water flowed, a perpetual reminder that humanity's greatest achievements and greatest challenges are often the same thing. The secret Rome hid for 1,000 years was finally free. Whether the world was ready for it remained to be seen. Some questions still haunt researchers. How many other inventions lie buried, forgotten, or deliberately suppressed? What else did ancient civilizations achieve that we've lost or never discovered? What secrets are being hidden today that future generations might uncover? The machine opened more mysteries than it solved. And in sealed chambers beneath libraries, in encrypted digital archives, in the minds of secretive organizations, other knowledge waits. Other inventions that humanity created, then chose to bury. Other gifts that were deemed too dangerous, too disruptive, too revolutionary for their time. The Brotherhood may have revealed their secret, but they're not the only keepers of hidden knowledge. The world is full of locked doors, sealed vaults, and guarded truths. Gaius's machine was just one story. There are others, and they're still hidden, still waiting, still protected by those who believe that some knowledge should remain secret until humanity proves itself worthy. The real question isn't what Rome hid for 1,000 years. The question is, what else is still hidden? If you liked this mystery, you won't believe the next one.